Petersburg Cultural Center, and we'd like to welcome you to the 16th in our series of Fireside Chats, Riding the Rails on the Interurban. Great to have this good crowd out here today, and we hope to keep you entertained and informed. We'd like to thank today's sponsors, Ozaki Bank, Olson's Piggly Wiggly, and Java House, who kindly provided the coffee that's over here. Feel free to get up and get some coffee and cookies during the talk, and also feel free to ask questions. About 2/3 of the way into the talk, we'll have a staff member or a volunteer, or both, circulating with some little cards you can write questions on, and we'll pass out pens also, and you can jot down your questions. We'll collect them and bring them up to the panel. We also will be, in our time-honored tradition, passing around the old-fashioned hat. It's getting a little flat now, but it still works. And asking you to make a small contribution, or a big contribution for that matter, to help keep the series going. We try to do this off and on to help fund this very important oral history series that helps preserve some of the memories of the fine folks like the 6 that we have on the stage today. With that, I'll pass things along to Jim Coots, our moderator. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks again to the Cultural Center for being the host for the Fireside Chats. Just a couple announcements. Some of you have ordered videos of the previous Fireside Chats, and they will be available. There are some that are here, but the last 2 we don't have the videos yet, and they'll be available, Sarah, okay, by December 1st, so if you've ordered one or want one, stop at the Culture Center or call them, and also the videos of today's program. Also, along that line, maybe some of you have been to all of the Fireside Chats, maybe some of you have been to some of them. If you have missed any of the Fireside Chats, starting today at 4 o'clock, Channel 14 on the cable, the community channel, will start showing the series of videotapes that they have from our previous Fireside Chats. Today at 4 o'clock, tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock will be the Fireside Chat number 1 about remembering Cedarburg. I don't know when the other ones will be shown. Maybe some of you saw some of them previously because they're starting the series over again because they had run it over the last couple months. But in order to see when they're going to be run, check on Channel 14 because they have the schedule of when they're going to show them. They may show them all in that same series at 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon and 8 o'clock Monday night. That's what they did previously. However, they did intersperse them at other times. So if you want to get a chance to see them, I would ask that you turn to Channel 14 and watch those. Today's topic, riding the rails on the interurban, I would imagine that most of you here, along with myself, were riders on what we used to call the interurban. And there were the many different lines. As one of our panelists, Chuck Damasky, has written the books on the various lines, and those books will be available for purchase later on, and Chuck has graciously said that he will donate a portion of the sale of those books to the Historical Society in helping with the restoration of the depot. So let me just introduce our panel. And first, Chuck Damasky, who has written the books and has some interesting stories about some of the things on the various lines. Kurt Grunwald. Kurt is president of the Ozaki Historical Society, and Kurt has done a yeoman's job in terms of the restoration of the interurban depot. Needless to say, Kurt can tell you some of the things and problems that have jumped in the way, and we're going to get there. Next, Ed Rappold, our local photographer, who Ed has a lot of photographs over here, and Ed has some stories to tell us about the interurban line as well. And then 2 of our neighbors whose fathers both worked for the interurban, Vivian Sheriff Lobbs and Ann Winter, and they will be able to recollect some of the things. And again, Vivian has brought a lot of things along, and and Kurt has brought things, Chuck has brought things, Ed Rappold, Cedarburg's Jimmy Stewart, Bob Armbruster has brought some things, and so there's a lot of things to view here later on. Then our final panelist, Tom Moe. Tom is the administrative coordinator for Ozaukee County. Tom has a lot of experience in government and has been very active in the establishment of what we know as the Interurban Trail, patterning itself in many cases after what the original trail was. So panelists, we're very happy to have you here, and what we'll do today is basically what we've done with the other fireside chats. We'll have each of the people give us a little rundown of some of their feelings and some of the history of the interurban line, some stories that they may remember, and then after they've each done that, then we'll have time to interact. And I know there's a number of you who have some stories that maybe you would like to tell about the interurban line, and I'd encourage you, as Sarah said, we'll have people circulating with paper and pencil or pens, and if you want to jot questions down or if you have something to say, then we'll give you that opportunity. Just one thing about our next fireside chat, that will be one where we hope we have 100% audience participation. We're going to turn things around. It's going to be your turn. We'll have some people who will have some stories to tell, but we also want some of you to help us to remember some things about Cedarburg that maybe we have or haven't discussed in the previous fireside chats. I know there's a number of you that have stories that you can tell, or little remembrances, or just things that we really should help to remember as Cedarburgers. And I think that's one of the greatest things that's come out of this series, is to put on tape and to have the remembrance of so many of the significant things that have happened in the history of Cedarburg, and to have those things down so that we can remember them. I'll remind you about that at the end, hopefully, if I don't have a senior moment. And so let us begin then with our riding the rails on the interurban. And Chuck, let's start with you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Got to use the mic, that's right. Okay. What I'm going to do is just kind of give you a little brief history of the line from my expert going through the book. Service began on October 28th, 1907 to Cedarburg. And from that point on, Port Washington started on November 2nd, 1907, and then to Sheboygan on September 22nd, 1908. The interurban system was then the Milwaukee Northern, which was a group of investors that started the line in an investment group, and they only went into Milwaukee. They could not run any streets in Milwaukee, so they had to run up into Milwaukee, and that was as far as it went. Also in the Sheboygan was the same way. They went into Sheboygan, and the Wisconsin Power and Light ran the system, and they went over their line. They had rights to go over the railroad. Some interesting points that I can talk about right now is that since the Milwaukee Northern line was a pretty straight arrow type of interurban line, they 1927, to improve from having accidents on the line, which there was many on this line, in 1927 they doubled the track from Milwaukee up to Brown Deer to enhance the service. In 1928, the line then was sold to the Milwaukee Electric Rail and Light Company, which owned the line. They kept the name Milwaukee Northern Division because since it was so used to the people, they didn't want to change it, so they kept that name, the Milwaukee Northern. In November of 1929, they improved services on the line from 17 to 25 minutes from Milwaukee to Sheboygan. That was one of the improvements that they did. They also installed block signals on the line to prevent near accidents. They also introduced a new rider coupon book, which was called a 10-ride commuter ticket. It was good for 6 months, and it was $4.15, or 41.5 cents per ride. From Cedarburg to Milwaukee, a round trip was 95 cents, and it took 40 minutes. During November of 1931, to increase ridership on the interurban system, the entire system offered on Sundays $1. You could ride the interurban anywhere on this system for $1 all day. You could go into Milwaukee, Sheboygan, out to Kenosha, anywhere, ride over 428 miles of the interurban system for $1 a person all day. This was done to try to stimulate the interurban system, which was starting to fail. They knew that the automobile was taking over. The interurban seen that, and they tried to bring people onto the interurban. In fact, in Sheboygan, what they did there, they offered people free rides on the system in Sheboygan just to get people to ride the interurbans to do shopping, and was sponsored by the local merchants in Sheboygan. All attempts were made to keep the line running, but when the finally decision was made on September 23rd, 1940, the line was abandoned north of Port Washington. There was massive hearings held on this, trying to keep the line going, but at that time, the Milwaukee Electric Rail and Transport Company, which owned the system, was no longer interested in being in the interurban ridership, so they decided to get out of it, and they did everything possible, saying that it would cost over $500,000 to refurbish the lines in this particular part. So that was abandoned on September 23rd, 1940, and then the last section of the line from Port to Milwaukee was abandoned on March 29th, 1948. I'll give you a little history on it. So.
Okay. Kurt?
I put a couple of things together just to review. He went through some of the dates already. In early news accounts that appeared in the news graphic from the time when the interurban opened, a couple of the quoted accounts were pandemonium broke out when the interurban opened its first Sunday run that November. More than 10,000 passengers attempted to ride from Milwaukee to Cedarburg in one day. Rushing for a car was almost a duplicate scene when a fire breaks out in an auditorium situation. So it really was a exciting thing that developed here to bring this transportation link to Ozaukee County. Service to Sheboygan then began on September 22nd, 1908, as Chuck mentioned, and the interurban rail system had a major impact on the development of the greater Ozaukee County area. Everything in this county benefited as a result of the interurban. It was utilized for transportation to and from work, to school, shopping, recreation, and a number of other uses, including it was used for freight, transportation, dairy, lumber, what have you. It played an important role on the economic, social, and cultural development of the area that linked all of our communities together, not only in Ozaukee County, but also to Sheboygan County and Milwaukee County and beyond. With the evolution of transportation, the news graphic later reported, there was little fanfare to mark its way out of existence. A few rockets were shot from the tracks when the last car left the terminal in Milwaukee and rode along the route to Port Washington on the last interurban run in 1948. So it met its demise, and it was kind of sad, and there wasn't all the fanfare like what it was when it began. It's unfortunate that this efficient mode of transportation met its demise, since today we talk about mass transit. We talk about a way to get to the metropolitan area for workers, for commuters, for shoppers. And what do we have? We have vehicles, we have some buses, we have taxis, but we really threw away what we had, and it was an efficient system. Few remnants of our past still remain today. One of those would be the interurban trail, which has just been recently redone, revitalized, which Tom will talk about that. That's a great asset and a great resource for our community again, and we're relinking our past with a different mode of transportation. Another asset that we have is the interurban bridge, which was completely restored in 1997 and completed. That is a great asset because it's one of our last remaining structures of the interurban. And then we have the interurban depot building, which is located in Cedarburg, and that building is the last remaining building or structure that is intact or in good enough condition to restore. Many of them have been cannibalized, demolished, or remodeled to the point where it doesn't pay to try to restore. So the Ozaukee County Historical Society several years ago embarked on that mission to restore that to its original grandeur, and that is moving forward today as funds allow. Today, through the support of many folks such as yourself, we continue to work together to preserve and restore that link to our past. The project is moving along as the funding allows. It's slower than what we wanted, but like Jim mentioned, we have met just about every kind of hurdle that is possible with the project as far as asbestos, lead-based paint, oil tanks, what have you. Everything that could be in a building that created problems, we had there. It's remarkable as to what has been accomplished, although it's taken longer than what we thought. It will get done, it's just taking time. And from there, once it is completed, it's going to be something that all of Ozaukee County can be proud of, not only restoring a link to our transportation past, but it'll serve as a museum and archives research center for Ozaukee County. It'll serve as a trailside stopover for those who are reusing our existing transportation system that now features bikers and hikers rather than the interurban. Thanks.
Thanks, Kurt. Ed, I know you, out of your collection, you have 2 tables of photographs over there. And if you would like to embellish what's there with those photographs, there's some stories you may have.
Well, there's about 38 by 10 pictures that I have in my collection of the interurban line years ago and of its construction. But since we've got a pretty good basic history part, let's get down to a little lower level where you might be interested in what happens when an interurban line comes through. On April 18th, 1906, the first grading took place from Cedarburg towards the north. And that started at Bridge Street, or what is now Bridge Road, and it hit the Marundi farm, which originally was 80 acres in size. Over in the early 1900s or even the late 1800s, about 10 lots were cut off of the 80 acres to make building sites along Bridge Road. When the interurban line came through, they went in a diagonal direction, and up until that time, all the fields were nice and square. Now they turned out to be triangles. Well, if you try to run a team and a wagon and a hay loader in a 45-degree angle field, why, it's impossible. Well, if the hay was plentiful, the corners were left, which wasn't all that bad either. It was the habitat for the quail and the pheasants, the meadowlarks, and the bobwhites, and whatever, and the rabbits. And even on one of the fields to the north of the track, which is now Georgetown, there was also a den of red fox for a number of years. Well, anyways, when the operation started, a man by the name of Al Fick, and I got this information yesterday afternoon from his son-in-law. He had a team of horses, and he started working in Cedarburg and worked all the way up to Sheboygan at 35 cents an hour. Now, I don't know, Chuck, do you know where they might have kept the horses and the men overnight when they were working on the line?
From what the newspapers indicated, that they had some local farms where they'd keep them at.
Because the amount of horses was tremendous. I mean, they had a couple hundred horses. In fact, in one of the sections in your book, it says that a truckload or a trainload of horses came in 100 at a time. Well, that's a lot of horses for to feed and to work. Well, one of the pictures on the table shows on the main street here alongside the hotel where they have a bunch of what they call slushers. And those were nothing more than handheld, horse-driven graders. They didn't have the big turnip pulls and the machinery that they have today. So it's remarkable. But then on the other hand, when the men, the real estate department, went out to get easements, why, they just went to the farmer and met him in the kitchen and around the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a sandwich or whatever, and they came to some deal, and they paid him money on the line, and so the farmer was happy, rather than different than what it would be today. And the insurance, or not the insurance man, but the real estate men moved along and purchased the land, and the graders and the men working behind them were just sort of kept up with them. So it was quite a nice thing, thinking that all this was done within a matter of 2 years from start to finish. And boy, I don't know, we've had a lot of progress since then. Now today, if you wanted to run a line from Milwaukee to Fond du Lac, for instance, first of all, you'd have to get the Public Service Commission to think about it, and that would take a year and a half. And then you'd have to get the EPA to make a report on what problem might be, and then EPA would finally give a consent, but then you'd have to deal with the DNR, and they'd come to a little ditch and they'd say, well, no, you can't build over there, you can't fill that in, because if we get a 5-inch rain, that's going to be a little stream, and anytime a stream is 5 feet wide, it's a navigable stream. Thinking, of course, that an Indian might come through with a canoe. Well, when you finally get a bridge over the stream, then there's a little low area beyond it, and that would be a 100-year floodplain. So, well, you at least have 3 or 4 years already wasted before you could even dig a hole. So things have changed. That's all for now.
Thanks, Ed. Vivian, I know you and Ann have a lot of personal recollections of the line because your dads were involved in the line in one way or another. So if you want to take a few minutes and share with us.
Well, I'd like to start with, my dad started working for it in 1923 for the Milwaukee Northern Railway at Cedarburg Car Barns. He worked on many different cars like the TM Freight, the Car 201, a line car, and jack of all trades. Car 202 for snowstorms and hauling fly ash from Port Washington plant to Thiensville Quarry for disposing. Milwaukee Northern was in business from 1907 to 1928. They were going broke and were purchased by the Milwaukee Electric Rail and Light Company in 1928 until their last day, March 28, 1948. My dad went to school to learn to be a motorman, and when an opening came up, he drove daily runs from Milwaukee to Sheboygan. He kept all his tests, which we still have today. The trainmen all had to have their watches checked once a week by a jeweler. If they didn't, they would lose 50 points for each time it wasn't operating properly. And I was really surprised. They had a very strict dress code to follow. They got deducted of points if their uniforms weren't clean, they weren't shaved. They lost so many points each day, up to a certain amount, and if you, I guess, were less than 751 points, if I remember right, you would be dispensed of. Your services weren't any longer needed. And then I just wanted to say it. My mother would take my twin brother and I on a ride, my dad's last ride of the day. We'd go up to Port Washington, in the turnaround, go back to Milwaukee. My dad would finish his day, and we'd go to a White Tower restaurant for our reward. We'd have some hamburgers. When we got back into the car, we only drove couple miles and we would both be sound asleep until we got back home. And my sister would take my twin brother Stuart and I, one at a time, on a Saturday down to Milwaukee, and we'd go to the Riverside to see a real show. And when the interurban came to an end, they asked my dad to help salvage the tracks. And he did, and earned more money at that job than working 25 years for the company. He loved the job, and it broke his heart to see the tracks being torn up. He enjoyed being with people every day. He had so many regular riders, and they would even wait once in a while for somebody who needed a little extra minute or two. But my dad was always dressed neat and clean, and when you see how people go to work today, it's really something to have this grade book and have everything judged in there. If they didn't fill out an accident report right, they were docked. If they were late, if they didn't signal for stop signs or stop at a traffic, they were all deducted of points. And I have the grade book in my purse. I thought it was really interesting. And I have a compass which was made by the Cedarburg Luminous Compass Company of Cedarburg. And I've checked with so many people, and nobody can tell me any whereabouts where this was made. If anybody has any idea, I'd be happy to get the information from you later. Thank you.
Well, Margaret, you guys didn't make those boxes and just give it a different name, right? Those compasses. Okay, Ann.
Okay, well, my father worked as a dispatcher, and originally the dispatcher's offices were in the car barns in Cedarburg, but eventually they were transferred to Milwaukee, which is, I think it's the electric company now, but at that time it was called the Public Service Building. But some of my warmest memories have to do with the motormen, because my first job, I worked way out on 66th and North Avenue, and I would catch the interurban on the corner of 3rd and North. And if they knew their customers, they knew their regulars, and if I wouldn't be waiting at that corner and there'd be a city bus across the street, they waited till everybody got off that bus to make sure I wasn't on it. So I have a real warm place in my heart for these men. They were true gentlemen. And one of the more memorable rides that I had was during the blizzard in the 1940s that paralyzed Milwaukee. And of course I worked that day, and the interurban would hit a snowbank. They would back up and they just kept hitting that snowbank till they got through. So I got home that night, but I found out I was the last interurban that got through. And one other memorable ride was the end of World War II, because then the motormen laid on the horn all the way home. It was a jubilant ride. And they were really great men.
Thanks, Ann. Now, you mentioned the car barns. I don't know if everybody here knows where the car barns were in Cedarburg.
Well, they're on Madison Avenue, and I think originally they were taken over by Keycafer, and I don't know what's in it now. But my dad had a little office on the 2nd floor in the back of the building.
That's a big white building right on the corner, or right on Madison, Ed? Is that where they were, right on where Victoria Drive comes down from First Emmanuel?
A little bit.
No, it was the other, those little white buildings, weren't they?
A little bit north of Center
Yeah,
Street.
yeah,
Mhm.
okay. By Cleveland, yeah, across from what now would be the Washington building, the low white buildings right along Hanover there.
It's where Kelch is now, too.
Yeah. Tom? Bring us up to date on the current use of the trail.
Thank you, Jim. I have only been in Ozaki County for about 4.5 years, and I wasn't born yet. And I'm getting a lot of feedback. I wasn't born yet when the interurban stopped running. but after listening to Mr. Rappold rail on the EPA and the DNR, I'm glad I'm with the county and not the state. This is something I think Ozaukee County government, and I hope its citizens, are extremely proud of. And I was struck by the comments earlier about the intent of the interurban and the result of the interurban in terms of providing transportation and a network and a recreational outlet to some degree, but also, of course, needed transportation. It's interesting, in the early 90s, there was talk about creating some sort of a county trail, a bike trail, pedestrian trail. Various communities did separate little links or little pieces of that. And then there was a study group formed, I think in the 97 or 98 at the county, to really sit down and talk about how to try to link the various segments and how to try to provide a transportation link from Milwaukee County to Sheboygan County through Ozaukee County. And with a lot of cooperation from all the levels of government, all the various local units of government, with tremendous cooperation from what is now We Energies in terms of donating what the land that they own now, which is the right-of-way, and a lot of hard work from a lot of dedicated volunteers, mostly made up of Ozaukee County residents. And I'll mention the Wards from Mequon who are in the audience today, who have been instrumental in the entire development of the trail. John and Helen, why don't you guys just wave or something. These folks here have spent an enormous amount of time in the development of the trail. And you can make me a pie for that introduction if you like. She makes the best pies. Not that I need it. But it's just been it's been a labor of love, and we have, I think, have ambitious plans to improve the trail. It's obviously struck a chord with many of the people who are interested in the history of the interurban line, but I think just as important, it's providing transportation opportunity for people, recreation, physical activity. You know, I serve in Ozaukee County, and we have over 700 employees, and every year we have to fund our budgets, and our budgets are increasingly under pressure, not only from the state fiscal issues, but also from the increasing costs of health insurance in our region, certainly. And so we're trying to really encourage our employees and our citizens to get more physically active, and we think perhaps the trail will help us in that regard. I did also, Mayor, bring some items. I always call you Mayor. Your Honor, sir. I brought some buttons, and they're on the table over there, and I hope you can wear them. Those are free buttons, and we are going to try to market additional things relative to the trail to help us raise additional funds. We do have some ambitious improvement planned, and one of the things that I've done on occasion, I also live in Cedarburg and Georgetown, and I've taken the trail on my bike to work in Port. And my wife couldn't believe it when I said I was going to do that, so I actually did it, have done it a number of times, and we're encouraging our employees as well. So it is you know, I think a really neat item. It's drawing bicyclists, enthusiasts from all over the region. I've heard already in the bicycle network, it's become the second or third most popular trail on the websites in terms of people wanting to travel to Ozaukee County to utilize the trail. And obviously they are here. They'll be staying in our hotels and motels and spending money in our restaurants and providing a needed economic boost in the tourism area. So it has a lot of wonderful attributes, and we look forward to continuing to improve it as we move forward.
Tom, some of us have the pins on that were developed. You might just talk about the design of the pin.
This design, which is a really unique design, is modeled after the old interurban railroad car, and it was done on a volunteer basis from one of our employees' mother, Mrs. Struck, who's an artist, and she did a masterful job, I think, of capturing the old with the new, namely the things that are allowed on the trail now. It's obviously for walking, bicycling, and cross-country skiing, non-motorized physical activities. We've been designated as an official bird sanctuary along the entire length of the trail, which has a significant impact from a statewide perspective. And we are selling these pins, although you folks are lucky today. We have some left over from our first anniversary. You're welcome to take one and hopefully support the trail as we move forward.
And then at the top of each one is the identification of the community that it.
Yes, I'm
that it
sorry,
goes
I didn't
through.
mention that. The top portion in this particular one is, does anyone have some reading glasses here? This is a Cedarburg one, so I was able to get one of those. Maybe I'll raffle this off to the highest bidder. I know people are looking for this one. But in each individual community, we're going to have, whether it be Belgium or Port Washington, wherever the trail is, Grafton, they'll be able to have a pin that's the identical insignia, but also unique to their individual community as well.
Thanks, Tom. Kurt, you mentioned stations. Were there stations in each of the communities along the interurban line? We know the one in Cedarburg is still here. What about Thiensville? What about Port? What about Sheboygan or other areas, maybe between you and Chuck?
There was a stopover on Donjas Bay Road, but it wasn't really a station that was endorsed by the line. There was one in Thiensville, Cedarburg, Grafton, Port. There were some stops along the way. Cedar Grove as well, and then into Sheboygan. And then there were numerous stops where they actually made the stops to pick people up and let people off. Structurally, the depot building that's in Cedar Grove is still very much the way it was, but it's converted to a home. But the outward appearance, it looks similar to the depot, and it's like a mini version of the Cedarburg depot. But that too, the interior has been restored, cannibalized, changed, that to change it back would be impossible. Other places in Port Washington that now I believe has an insurance or a commercial building use, that has been totally, I mean the whole looks of it is different than what it was originally. In Sheboygan, the same case. So really we have something with the Cedarburg depot that is not on the trail or not anywhere else. I mean, it's a one of a kind, so it's worthy of restoration.
Ed?
Well, the depot itself was just a little bit larger than what they would need in any other of the communities, because the fact that the Hilton Spring Park here in Cedarburg drew so many people out of Milwaukee. And at Cedarburg, they even had a double track, and of course they had the car barns, and they had the switching arrangement up there. And the people from Milwaukee would come out here, and drays or horse-driven taxis would take the people down to Hilton Spring Park. It was about the same thing as with the railroad station that's now up at Pioneer Village. That was a prototype station, but all the other ones up and down the line weren't as big. Here at Hilton Spring Park, they had to have waiting room space, they had to have outside protection, and they also had double rails where they would spot the cars until the people wanted to return to Milwaukee. So it's a prototype of a station.
Now, one thing you mentioned was the railroad coming out here. Was there competition for the interurban between, say, the Milwaukee Road, the Chicago Northwestern? Was there competition along the line?
No, not really, because the railroads, of course, were there first. And when the interurban was talked about, well, the various municipalities, they were begging to have the thing come through, and when the people from the transport company would go to visit the various communities, well, there was no opposition to it. And as a result, there was no opposition, as much opposition as what we have today if somebody wants to run a line. The farmers, they were just too glad to get materials out of Milwaukee. If something broke down on their equipment, they would just go to the house, and on that little box on the wall, they turned the hand crank and called Sears Roebuck, and the next day the part would be out here. And the farmers dealt with Sears quite a bit because they knew that Sears stood behind their products, everything they sold, with the exception of the manure spreader. Well, anyways, if you had that same situation today, people would be very much in favor of having a line come through. Oh, that would be ideal. Oh, we could use that. And boy, after a while, when it came to the end, well, then the NIBA would step in and they'd say, not in my backyard, but put it somewhere else.
As far as the type of cars, were there, somebody has asked a question as far as the different cars were concerned. Were there parlor cars? Was there beverage service? Was there a variety of things, or was it all one type of car on the
No, the car, actually they had a express service too in some of the cars, and materials would be brought out. Like for instance, well, I had two newspaper routes, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and the cars would dump out the sections of paper in bundles right in front of the interurban station, and I'd have to sit there and put them together, fold them in. They had two sections. One was the first section, one was the second section, and the third one was a pink sheet in the Wisconsin News. And in the evening, then you had the green sheet. So it didn't make any difference what the weather was. You had to put those papers together on the street. After a while, when the interurban ceased, then I believe it was the Greyhound bus routes that took over for a while, and then they would dump the newspapers on the steps at Garrett's drugstore. And that wasn't any handier when the weather was bad.
Vivian, you mentioned some of the regulations that the motormen had to go through, and one was with their time, with their watches. And I know that Bob Armbruster told me a story a couple weeks ago, and Bob, if you could just repeat what you told me about how you guys had the clock that they checked in with.
Right. When the interurban came through, my grandfather got one of these large clocks with the Arabic figure on the top, which was a regulator. It didn't chime, but it just had a mercury pendulum. That was supposed to be the most accurate thing at that time. And the motormen and conductors would have to come in every, I always said 2 weeks, but now Vivian said weekly to have their watches checked. Our watchmaker would check their watch and sign a slip, and then we'd have to turn it into the electric company every 2 weeks that these men had been here. If their watch wasn't keeping time, he had a little compass like this. It's not the Cedarburg compass, but the balance staff on a watch was made of steel, and if it was magnetized, the compass needle would swing with the beat of the balance wheel. So then they knew it would be very irregular. So you'd have to demagnetize the watch. We still have these two demagnetizers in a bench in a drawer back of our watchmaker's desk. Some people still have these older watches that come in, and they're still magnetized, so we have to demagnetize them. You put the watch in and keep drawing it back and forth until the magnetism was out of it. He had to be careful that he didn't get that watch near his bench, because his tweezers would be magnetized, and all the screws on his bench would jump to the tweezers. So you knew that it had to be taken care of. Because our watchmaker for many years lived in Milwaukee, and he took the interurban, they would wait for him if he was a little late. As they said too, they were very kind that way. They knew him that well. He sat in the front of the car and smoked a pipe, and there was a smoking section right adjacent to the motormen. So he enjoyed that trip and really relaxed with it. Got a couple of old programs with the schedules in them. I have them on the table, and some old pictures of the crew members. You got to know, coming in every week or 2 weeks, you got to know these men real well. Like, I believe this is Vivian's dad here on this picture, and the conductors, they all were pretty proud of their watches. We did it as a favor, but you got a lot of people in your store. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Vivian?
I would like to just add a couple of things. This is one of the calendars, and it's stamped once a week. And reading in the book with all the regulations, it says under watches, failure of interurban trainmen to have a watch inspected on a regular weekly basis, 50 points. Failure to have a watch in possession on duty, 100 points you lost. Failure to sound whistle for a station or roads, 50. Failure to answer stop signals from conductor, 25. It's really interesting to read through this book and about all their things, but here's his calendar where he had his watch checked every week. Every week you can see it's on there. Now, it didn't have to be at the same place. If he was in Cedarburg, he went to Umbersters. If he was in Milwaukee and had time, he'd go to a jeweler there, or Thiensville, wherever they had time to do it. But they had to make sure they had it taken care of, or you lose so many points, you were out of a job eventually. 1,000 to start out with is what this book says. But maximum was 1,000 is what you got. And if it went below 750, if you lost so many points, say you weren't, your suit wasn't, your uniform wasn't clean, or you didn't have your watch along, you would be docked so many points. And if it went below 750, you were just left go, really. But this little book has a lot of information of everything. If they had an accident and they didn't report it in time, it's listed in here. If they didn't fill it out properly, if they didn't have witnesses. Now, I noticed my dad had cards that he kept. The minute there was an accident or something, you had to get witnesses, and it said on there how important the company appreciated to fill that out, because it meant the person's job. If they didn't get it filled out and have enough witnesses, they would get docked points. So I'm still learning.
Chuck, one of the things that I'm sure that in putting your books together, you came across a lot of memorable things, and I think one of the things you mentioned was some of the accidents. So if you want to, just take some time to fill us in on that.
Okay. In my research, I found this particular line to probably be one of the worst ones with accidents. The MRK line, which ran between Milwaukee, Racine, and Kenosha, was another bad one, but the Milwaukee Northern was the worst. On the line that went to Waukesha during the Depression, people would come out from behind the bridge there was near Greenfield Avenue and walk in front of the interurban car to kill themselves. So I found that out in the Milwaukee papers. But on the Milwaukee Northern line, there were a total of over 90 accidents on the line. Between 1907 and 1948, on the Port Washington part, there was 40 deaths, and between Port Washington and Sheboygan, there was 50. And the papers were very vivid in their description, and one of them is this near Mequon, a horse ran away from the farmer and went over the bridge that was over the quarry, and it got its legs between the ties. And the motorman, he was coming, and those cars would go anywhere from 50 to 70 miles an hour on the line. By the time he could see this horse, it was too late, and the paper said the horse was ground to pieces beneath the wheels. Another one that was pretty vivid was on July 6th of 1921. By the way, that was 1917 that happened. In 1921, an 18-month-old baby boy was killed when he wandered away from his home near Grafton, and he walked onto the tracks when a train was coming and was killed. There was an interesting one here in Cedarburg. There was a sheriff in 1922 was at the station, and the passenger missed the train. So the sheriff took the passenger on his motorcycle to the next crossing to get onto the train. Unfortunately, he was on a motorcycle, and he thought the train was going to stop at the next crossing, but it did not. and he went across the tracks with his motorcycle, and he was killed, and a passenger survived. Many head-on collisions were on the line. That was one of the reasons why they went to a block signal type of arrangement to help prevent that with the red and green and amber lights on the rails, on the overhead, so that they would know what section was free to go in. One of the interesting accidents that happened in 1930 in Port Washington was, it was on September 26th, and there's a street called Spring Street, as you much know about Port Washington, is kind of downhill. Well, this truck, AMP truck, tangled up with an interurban car and broke its air pipe mechanism. So the interurban sat there and, of course, was waiting for the line car to come from Cedarburg to take the car back to the car shops. Unfortunately, when they came back, the line car bumped the interurban car. The handbrake was not set. Well, the car ran or rolled all the way down the hill from Spring Street, and the way the paper reported, it was going like 50 miles an hour down with nobody on it, and it didn't make the curve by Smith Brothers and ran into the building, went off the tracks and hit the building. In fact, I have a picture of that accident on the display over there. Many accidents were on the line, and that was one of the main reasons why they were attempting to do a grade crossing situation in Milwaukee to prevent these types of accidents on the line. There was near Cedarburg, the right-of-way was sprayed with a weed killer, 2,4-D at that time, and a local farmer's cows got out and they ate the grass that was sprayed, and all the cows died. And 2 of them must have been not too well after eating this, which didn't die right away, but those got nailed when an interurban car came through. So these are some of the things you find in the newspapers, and some are pretty vivid. In Sheboygan there was many accidents as well, but this line here did have its share of accidents, and many of them were fatalities where people were killed in.
Any other recollections that you would like to make before we ask anybody in the audience to have any questions? Any other recollections, Vivian or Ann, that you'd like to share with us? Vivian, I know you've talked to a lot of school groups, and you have some things on the table over there that show that.
That's what I was just going to bring up. I've been asked to give talks at West Lawn School, 3rd graders, for 3 or 4 years, and they asked me at Parkview, and I've gone there, and I only went through high school. I never thought I'd be a teacher, but those teachers take about 20, 25 kids, and when I went to give my talk, there were 65 kids, and I thought, wow, I wonder if I can handle this. Well, they just happened to have recess, and when they came in, they were kind of wore out, and they sat so quiet you could hear a pin drop, and they are so interested in all this history. On one of their daily walks at the end, like, their fun day or what, they'd walk to Cedarburg, they'd go through City Hall, they saw the quilt hanging there, they'd go across the interurban bridge, and then they'd go to the station. So they were familiar with everything before I would give my talk. And they were so interested, and I'd display everything, and my dad has a little tablet from the Milwaukee Auditorium, which he always had in his little cover halls or his uniform. And I put that out, and the kids thought that was really neat. It's only this big, and it's got a little pencil that holds it closed, and you open it up, and it's a little pad of paper if you had to write a name or a license number or what. And many of the kids draw those pictures. I carried his toolbox there. They drew pictures of all the tools in there, and little tags like they used to deliver or haul milk years ago. They'd have little milk tags on there for the farmers, and they were really interested. And I think I was surprised. I thought I would see some kids here today. That's why I wanted to bring all those things. but they're really interested.
I would second that, because the last about 4 or 5 years I have gone to teach a specific thing in each of the elementary schools. And it's really interesting to see how much the teachers do spend time on Cedarburg history, and that's a very important part of it. I know Eddie has done the same thing in terms of taking his slide presentation and his pictures to those schools. So that's one of the reasons too why we wanted to, have these fireside chats, to make sure that we had so much of this stuff down on tape so that it would be preserved, so it wouldn't be something that would be lost. Any other comments?
Well, yes, the mention was made that the conductors were very accommodating by waiting for people and being sure that they were on the bus or on the train. Well, my grandfather worked in Milwaukee, and he did this for years, and the conductor always knew that he'd have to get off at Washington Street, Washington Avenue, and he'd even take him over across the street because he lived right next to the track. However, one night he fell asleep and he had a new conductor and he ended up in Sheboygan. So I don't know. I never did find out whether he had to pay to get back home or if they brought him back free of charge. I mentioned the fact that, there was a little, on some of these streets they had little shelters. We had one on Bridge Road, was a 3-sided one, and it faced towards the east or to the track. And many times we sat in there, and if the weather was bad or it was raining, we had nothing else to do. If we had a spare penny, we'd put it on the track and flatten it out. The interurban track was a shortcut to school too. In the winter time, we had to make darn sure that there wasn't going to be any car coming because there wasn't much room on either side of the track to dive into. In the summer months, it didn't make any difference. You just rolled off into the ditch and let the car go by. We had an awful time once in a while when I worked on the farm with my uncle, and the cattle were generally on the north side of the track because the fields up there were not that too good for production, but it was a good pasture land, and that land ran all the way down. In fact, that area now is Georgetown, and the back end of the farm was abutted the Cedar Creek, and there was generally about 30 to 50 feet of water line where the cattle could eat or drink. And but when they had to come back to the farm for milking and that, we had to make sure that the car had just gone by and there wasn't another one coming until the cattle were across the track. If we weren't sure, sometimes we'd put our ear on the rail and you could hear if there was any motion up and down the lane. So that's, I had one miserable experience though. In 41, 42, I was taking pictures of the Turner basketball teams at the new gymnasium. I had my films all loaded, but I had to take more pictures than I had films loaded, so I had a box of film along with me. So I went halfway up the stairs in the back, and it was rather dark. And it was a safe place to change film and start some more work. Well, I had the box open, I was filling up my slide holders, and if a car didn't come around from the south and just light up that whole area, I fell across a box of film in order to save it from being fogged, and I finished the job, but there were some sheets of paper that were fogged because that cotton picking train.
Kurt?
Vivian had mentioned, along with Bob Armbruster, about the clocks and the time element. And in looking at some of the old news graphic articles, I came across the comment that was made, or the quote, where that you could almost set your clock by the schedule, that they were so timely. You know, I'm sure there were exceptions, but that time was such an important part of the whole schedule that it was so reliable, which is a neat part of it. You don't always see that or hear that today.
My recollection with the interurban was always along the Waukesha line, because Waukesha was my home, and we had I can vividly see that that building, the office, and where it was, and the TMERL, I think it was, that it was called. And so we always purchased tickets there, but you mentioned that there were stops along the way, like at Donges Bay Road and other things. Did the motormen also sell tickets on the interurban itself, or did they have to be purchased previously before you got on the interurban, or how did that work? Anybody know anything about that?
Well, in earlier times, you could buy them at the office, but then also later, they were closing the offices down, and then the conductor would sell them. He would be given his allotment for tickets, and then he would sell them. He'd have his cash and his drawer with the tickets, and he'd have to turn it back in at the end of the day.
Vivian?
I can just add a little story to that too. My mother gave us $1 to go to Grafton. A lot of her sisters lived in Grafton, not far from the interurban track. And my dad and Mike Mending was the conductor, and I gave him the $1 for my twin brother and I, and he had his little change thing, and he punched it, and he gave me $1 in change back. And I was excited, and I said, "Mending, Mending." And he said, "Shh." I said, "You gave me $1 back. They're not supposed to do that." And reading in this rule book now, if he would have got caught, he would have lost some points too. And we were only honest little kids and wanted to pay our way. We had the money, but I'll never forget that either. And when the interurban went out, I was only 14 years old, so if my dad hadn't saved all this stuff and talked about it, he had a box of negatives. They were only little pictures like this. And when some of the fellows from Milwaukee came and saw them, they said they had no recollection that those cars were on this area for, the Milwaukee Northern. And they did a nice article in a magazine and said, "A daughter's devotion," and I almost cried when I got home from one of the talks or one of the promotions that they had for the interurban station, because I didn't know it, and then they gave me that magazine and it was in there. And I've given talks at churches, and I've been trying to really promote the station and the past history, but people really are interested. I don't belong to any committees or any clubs, but I volunteer a lot of my time, so being an old-timer all my life from Cedarburg.
Are there any of the cars remaining? I know there's a trolley museum at East Troy, but are there some of the cars that are still around someplace?
Well, there are a few, but none of the cars that ran on this line. These were built by Niles, and they were wooden cars. There later on, they were put with metal sheeting over them and then used in Milwaukee. But the East Troy Trolley Museum has 846, which is an old Milwaukee streetcar that was up in Appleton. And then the museum also has a Wisconsin Power and Light car that ran from Sheboygan to Plymouth and that neck of the woods. And that's part of a restoration project that's been going on for quite a few years. There are some interurban cars left down at the Illinois Railroad Museum, but they're in deplorable condition because they didn't have rust proofing back then, and those cars ran in the city streets, so all the undercarriage and the metalwork underneath is all rotted out. So those cars are in, you take them out, you'd literally go right through the floor. The bolsters over the trucks that run the motors on each end of the car. There are a few, but they're in bodies. That's about it. Of the many cars there were, there's just a handful left.
Chuck, you mentioned something about going to Plymouth and from Sheboygan. Were there lines that went from, say, Sheboygan to Green Bay? Somebody asked that question about, were there other lines that if someone went, say, took the interurban up to Sheboygan, that they could then go to Green Bay? Or
No, there was nothing then. There was, it went from the Wisconsin Power and Light, went from Plymouth to Elkhart Lake, and I'm not that familiar where it went from that point on. But no, there was nothing. The line that went, the Milwaukee Northern, when it was being considered to be built, it was going to have a Y connection here in Cedarburg to go to West Bend. but that never developed because of financial difficulty.
And all the lines originated in Milwaukee?
Right.
Where I want to say the
There was,
We Energies building is now,
Right.
and I noticed last time I was down there that the doors, that they've done a lot of restoration on that
yeah,
building
they've spent a
as well.
considerable amount of money to make it look like an interurban depot. You know, they've spent that quite a bit. The lines went all the way out to Racine, Kenosha. The lines went out as far as Burlington, as far as out to Watertown, and then it went as far as Sheboygan. And out of those, there was like 428 miles at its peak.
Was the North Shore line, I can remember the North Shore Depot being on like 6th and Michigan or something like that. That was a separate setup, wasn't it, that went down to
Yeah, the
Racine
North
and
Shore
Kenosha?
line ran between Milwaukee and Chicago. That ran down that way, but that was a high-speed interurban line also. They had very high embankments. If you ever seen some photos of the North Shore, the poles went out on an angle. And the reason for that was because those cars, there are movies that show these cars, and those cars were going 70, 80 miles an hour. Those really moved. And they had the poles out so that the momentum would keep the poles out, you know. They'd kind of want to pull in.
Edward.
When you talk about any extension of the line, there was supposed to be a line from Fond du Lac to Cedarburg. Now, up on the east side of 45, here some years back, the real estate department had me take some aerial photos of the grading that had already taken place. Now, it was pretty well grown shut, but the company was going to sell the land, and they needed pictures of it in order to divide it up to the abutting property owners. And so there was an intention of putting a line up that far. There's another interesting thing. When the interurban came into Cedarburg here, it was quite an influx of new people coming into town. A lot of these names are very familiar, like for instance Bradburn, Kitsley, St. John. Now St. John was the superintendent of the area here, and a street is named after him, and his little cottage is still alongside what used to be the car barn. Rutherford, Hespy, Eifler, Montauba, Pergandy, Winter, Hebner, Nerodi, Bundy, Keither, Fick, Sheriff, and there might be, well, I know there's quite a few others, but these are the only ones I could think of at the present time. But all these people came to town. A lot of them resided around the interurban area, and they all made a pretty good contribution to the city.
How much work was actually done on the cars in Cedarburg? Was there a lot of work that was done there? And I think your dad, you said, started out as was he a mechanic there, or?
He was a dispatcher, and he was no mechanic by any means.
Chuck.
When Milwaukee Northern had it, they did all their work here in Cedarburg in the car shops. Their woodworking, their metalwork, electrical, everything. Once the TM took over, all those facilities then were shut down here and taken to Cold Spring shops in Milwaukee for that. But when it was Milwaukee Northern, period, that work was done here. The cars were wood, sidings to them, so they had a massive wood shop that had to redo the repairs on it, and they had their own blacksmith shop here also, so that they could do the necessary metal repairs to the cars.
That's where my dad started, in the car barns. And he did cleaning and repairing, and I have many pictures of him with, I don't even know what all the different parts and stuff are, but that's where he began working for them. And after that, he went to school and got his license, or had his education to become a motorman. And that's what he ended, and then tearing up the tracks. So he really worked as long as he could for it. But he went on the buses and he didn't like all that double clutching. So he left the job and he went to Metamold and worked at Metamold for 19 years.
I apologize, Nancy. I knew somebody told me that. It was Vivian, not you, that told me about their dad working in the mechanical end of it. Okay, let me just see two things. How many of you rode the interurban? Holy man. How many of you had relatives who were associated with the interurban in one way or another? Quite a few. Okay. If anybody has any questions, this is your opportunity, or comments that you would like to make. Let's start here, Wally, and then we'll catch you next, okay?
In restoring the interurban depot here in Cedarburg, there's one large room that was completely asbestos plastered, and it has a large crane rail above it, which I imagine was above some sort of motor generator set. Can you shed any light on that motor generator set?
It was a rotary converter. The voltage needed for running the cars was 600 volts DC, and they had to be placed every so many miles apart, otherwise they wouldn't have the necessary voltage to run them. I don't know what the distance between Cedar Grove had one, Belgium had one, not as big rotary converters, but they were also at that time selling electricity to the local area too. Then they would provide, since the power came in from the Port Washington power plant that was owned by the Milwaukee Northern, not the one that is there now. They had their own power plant at Port Washington to provide the power for the line.
I wonder how many of you could fit into this letter that somebody has written. As a lifelong resident of Cedarburg area and a property taxpayer since 1946, I can offer a story of a World War II veteran's return from military duty of nearly 3 years. I boarded the interurban at Milwaukee for the last leg of my journey back to Cedarburg and arrived at the old depot on Center Street at 10:30 p.m., January 8th, 1946. Needing a ride home, I walked down to Holnagel's Tavern. Some of you will remember where that was, right, Skippy? Uh-huh. But they were closed. I noticed the business across the street was still open and went there, where I was told by the owner that he's too busy, but after I offered him $10, he agreed and took me home. Shades of what you hear about some of the veterans who came back from some of the wars and felt they weren't too appreciated. And this was World War II, you know. And the person traveled on the interurban many times, and it was kind of interesting that, you know, World War II was such a, you know, when that was over, everybody was so happy, and an interesting situation that would happen in Cedarburg. Wally.
How were the cars heated?
Oh, how were the cars heated? How were the cars heated?
There were two ways. They were electric as well as stoves. They did have wood stoves in the very early cars, but then they converted them to electric because of the fire hazard of a wood car.
No. Yeah, but
How much has been spent on the restoration of the depot, and how much more is needed to finish it?
there you go. That's the question you're hoping for, Kirk.
Okay, the depot project, with the acquisition of the depot and all of the restoration and to make it turnkey, is going to be about a $750,000 project. At this point, we have raised everything except we still need approximately $125,000 to complete it. So we're well on our way. We do have some funds currently that we can start the restoration project on the interior. The exterior, if you are south of the trail looking north on the interurban trail, and you take a look at that, what you see now, and then if you look at the photo from 1908, which we have, you'll see that it's basically the same. It has been restored to its original appearance. The only thing that has really changed in the picture is the steps leading in. That's a little bit different. And then the grade of the roadbed is different than what it was originally. Otherwise, the doors have been replicated. The original Cream City brick has been restored to its natural state. Even the chimney brickwork has been restored to its original height from what it was. Every little detail on the exterior, as far as the wood extensions of the rafters, the copper gutters, all of that has been replicated. So we're well on the way, but now if you take a tour of it now, the interior has been gutted, so it's not very pretty. But we're going to start on the waiting room to replicate that to what it was when you walked in there, Al, in 1910. So you'll be stepping back into time. So at this point, in answer to your question, we need $125,000 to complete it.
You have received some grants, Kurt, in association with the city, I believe, to help with some of that, but I think the grant stuff is just about at the end, right?
We had a 80-20, 80%, 20% grant through the state of Wisconsin, which was also through the, it was the DOT combined with federal funds, that we had to meet certain criteria, which we did. And that now we have signed off on. We are through with that. The funding is over. We do not have any funds remaining on that. But in many ways, it is good that we are through with that, because we can move forward without all of the red tape and all the paperwork that was involved with it.
Let's get Don.
In 1907, when this all started, there was an awful lot of roadbed required, and they used gravel. I know of two gravel pits. One of them was on the east side of the Milwaukee River, south of Donges Bay Road, which is now Lac de Cours. Of course, that was a gravel pit before the interurban started, and it served as a gravel pit afterwards. And then another gravel pit was what is now Laurel Lake in Thiensville. And there was a railroad spur going all the way from, I do believe, the interurban tracks themselves, because I have seen pictures where they were hauling gravel and crushed stone in the cars on the trestles and so forth. And this rail spur did go across, and today I think there is a ruin of a trestle still out on the island behind what was Wolf's Island. And at the bailiwick in Thiensville, just to the north side of the building, you can still see the swale where the tracks went through and crossed North Main Street there and Cedarburg Road down at Wolf's Island. And behind Pigeon Creek Antiques, there is a stone quarry, and a Neiman owned that for a long time. And I understand at the bottom of that quarry, there are a couple of cars.
Well, the only cars that I know of that are in are Mequon Quarry. I have a picture of it taken in 1931 when they had the trailers of like 1246 series that were no longer usable, and scrap metal was no value anymore to the electric company at that time. So they took them and literally threw them over the quarry there, and there's a picture on that board over there showing a body of a car 1246 falling over the edge of the quarry into the bottom. That's the only one I've ever known of, and I've never heard of any other ones, but there may be.
I was the one who asked the question about the parlor car, and I got that off a timetable where it said they had these limited trains 3 times a day with parlor cars and to make advance reservations. Does anybody here know what the parlor cars were like, what type of surcharge and seating arrangements and those types of things?
Well, the parlor cars were the dinner cars also, where they provided dinner. They tried that at one time. They went down as far as the MRK line up to Sheboygan and all the way out to Watertown to provide dinner service on the cars. The parlor cars also provided a unique atmosphere with chairs that were more of a, instead of a cushioned seat, it was more of a round seat type of thing. And a smoking parlor, of course, they had on those cars at that time too.
We had some wicker furniture, old wicker furniture, on our porch for years, which originally were furnishings for the interurban. And when they changed their decor, they ended up in our porch.
Still have them?
One of the advantages of
somebody
working for the
that I know
interurban,
has.
huh? Mrs. Wren?
Well, just a couple of human interest stories. Mr. Burgandy was a motorman when I was riding the interurban, and it always amazed me how my mother knew what I was doing here in Cedarburg, and we were in Mequon, and I thought, how does she know all this stuff? Well, Mr. Burgandy went to the same church I did, and he saw her at church, and he filled her in on all my little adventures. And the other little tidbit is when the interurban line was discontinued, I had to ride a Greyhound bus, and I decided that was time to get married then. I didn't like those air brakes on the buses, and it was time to get out of this racket.
One other question that I forgot to ask before. I know I've talked to a number of people who lived in Thiensville and went to Cedarburg High School. How many of you rode the interurban to school? Many of you here that did that? Okay, mix.
Going back to, my father worked for the interurban, started out as a conductor, and after a number of years, he joined Ann's father. He was the night dispatcher up in the old car barns. And at that time, we lived in a little stone house next to Faith Church. I think that's related to Eddie Rappel, isn't it? Somebody that owned that house, a Schwandes or something?
Right.
So then my dad could walk to work. Of course, he just went up the tracks to go to the old car barns. And then when you talk about watches, I have his watch on the table. Bob Armister checked it for me, and it was made in 1910, and it still keeps accurate time, so that's 93 years. That's priceless as far as I'm concerned. We kind of uncovered it by accident, so I've got it. And other than that, talking about using the interurban, I went into the Army on the old interurban. I got out on Jefferson Street and headed down to the Armory.
What I just wonder from Vivian is who were the spies that knew that the points should be taken off and found these men doing all these wrong things?
I don't know if it was reported or if people filled out a card, or I haven't seen anything on that, but just when they asked how it was fired or kept heated, there are even points in here. If they didn't keep the fire going or they couldn't dispose of the ashes along the road. So I don't really know about that. I'm sorry.
Okay, panelists, any?
Just
Yes,
one,
sir, Mr.
Just
Rudd.
one thing. When you talk about furniture, about 2 months ago, I got the gentleman. In fact, J.I. Beggs is the headmaster of, and the brainstorm for all the interurban lines that came out of the public service building. Well, about 2 months ago, I got donated for the Historical Society Depot John I. Beggs' office chair. So that's quite a relic.
Super. It's unbelievable how much can turn up if you let people know that you're interested. And I mean, you look at the displays today, and one of the things, again, with our former Fireside Chats, a number of things that people had that they came forward with to share some mementos as far as Cedarburg or whatever, all the stuff. Vivian, you had a lot of stuff from the merchants, the things that they used to give out as far as bonuses or whatever it might have been. Yeah,
Well,
Kurt?
there's going to, excuse me, there's going to be the same action here once we get the depot done as what we had with the railroad depot up at Pioneer Village. That thing was completely gutted, but we've got more stuff in there now than what the railroad ever had.
Kurt?
in listening to some of the people talk about the building of the interurban line and that, I'm just kind of awed and inspired by the work ethic that it took to put this thing together. And when you look at some of the pictures of the building of the line, the work and the diligence that it took to do this, I mean, they didn't have the equipment we have today. It's just amazing that they put this thing together and made it function the way they did. And one other thing that I have, we do have a tape and a video that was made by a Milwaukee organization that actually highlights the line from Milwaukee running north all the way up into Sheboygan. And it's, if you're interested in the interurban and you kind of want to experience actually riding on a car, this actually, it's actual footage. So it's neat. It's a historical item. We will have this tape in the Ozaukee County Archives Research Center, which is located just next to City Hall in Cedarburg on the lower level of the Lincoln Building, and they're open every Tuesday. So if you'd ever want to check it out, just call the Society or stop in, and you're welcome to check it out and keep it for a few days and return it the following Tuesday. Okay?
Thanks, Kurt, and panelists, thank you for enlightening us with what it used to be like to ride the rails. And audience, thank you. This is the greatest audience participation I think that we've had in all the fireside chats, and that then paves the way for the next one on February 22nd, where it's going to be your turn, where we're going to ask as many people as possible, hopefully all of you who are here today or others, to come forward and to share something about Cedarburg, about Ozaukee County, about Port Washington, Grafton, Thiensville, Mequon, wherever it might be, to share with us a remembrance that you have, or an event or a happening, or whatever it might have been, so that again we can record that on tape, so that we have that, so that future generations will be able to know what it was like to live in the various places in Ozaukee County. So panelists, thank you so much for your participation. And Kurt has one announcement he'd like to make about the upcoming program as far as the Ozaukee Historical Society.
Real quick, there's all kinds of neat information, including up here as well as at all the tables, and everybody will stick around that we're willing to answer questions that you may have regarding the trail or regarding the history of the interurban or any element of it, as well as tomorrow night, on Monday night, up at the Country Inn Suites in their Conference Center ballroom. The Ozaukee County Historical Society is having a very special program where they're mixing just a little tidbit of history along with bluegrass music. We have an award-winning group of 4 people that are going to be up there. They're going to be playing and singing. It's really going to be a fantastic program. You're welcome to attend. It's free admission. There's no charge to get in. It's at 7 p.m. That's on the north side of Port Washington at the Country Inn Suites Ballroom. There is information on the far table over there if you'd like to pick up a little slip. Feel free to do so and take it along, and hope to see you there. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for attending. Thank you much.